No celebration that time. That time the Soviets were here to crush a democratic uprising called the Prague Spring that we'll talk about just a little bit later on during the tour. 1989 arrived. Communism began to collapse around Europe. It collapsed here in what used to be Czechoslovakia in 1989 with the Velvet Revolution, which we're also going to talk about later on during the tour. So again, there was another celebration here pretty much everywhere. Lots of great buildings and architecture around us. We have a lot to choose from, but I think we'll first look at and talk about, this Gothic, I faked you out, I'm sorry. Look, this big Gothic church over here is called Týnská Cathedral, or the Church of Our Lady Before Teen. And the Teen is spelled with a T-Y-N. And construction began on that Gothic church a long time ago in the year 1365 during the reign of a king named King Charles IV. Now, King Charles IV, he never lived long enough to see him finish this church because it took a long time to build. They didn't totally finish it until 1511. And here's a very cool detail on this church. If you look at the two towers up there, the two steeples, if you compare the tower on your right with the tower on your left, you'll notice that the tower on the right is bigger than the tower on the left. And those are called the Adam and Eve towers. The Adam tower is a little bit bigger and more manly, and then the Eve tower on the left is a little bit smaller and more ladylike. And Adam, well, when there's sun, he shades her from the noontime sun. And they did that intentionally. It's not a mistake of some sorts. They did that on purpose. And that's an important Gothic church because it's closely linked, it's closely associated with the big green guy on this statue in the center of the square. Now that big green guy there, his name was Jan Hus. And Jan Hus is important to world history, not just Czech history. He invented Protestantism, but he got no credit for it because the other guy named Martin Luther showed up in history about 90 years later, stole all the credit. But this guy was almost 100 years before Martin Luther. And another thing he's very known for is preaching against the Catholic Church and their doctrines, their way of doing things. He didn't think, for instance, that you should have to pay penance for your sins, pay money for your sins to the church in order for you to be forgiven and you go to heaven. He didn't think you should have to buy your way into heaven. And he also thought that Catholic Mass should be translated from Latin to Czech because nobody spoke Latin here. They spoke Czech, and he just wanted people to be able to understand what was going on in church. It sounds like a good idea, unless you're the Vatican and the Pope, because they said, oh, we're pretty sure that you're a heretic and we're going to burn you alive. And so they burned Jan Hus at the stake in the year 1415. He had a bunch of followers called Hussites, and he still has a bunch of followers called Hussites. And the Hussites, they still have their own church here in this old town square. And it's that Baroque church that you see on this corner over here. Now this Baroque church on the corner is called St. Nicholas Church. And it was built in 1735 as a Catholic church. Didn't stay a Catholic church. In 1871, the Catholics packed up and moved out. And then the Russian Orthodox moved in. And you can still see Orthodox crosses above the church on those green needlepoint domes. Orthodoxy didn't do very well here. It didn't catch fire like Jan Hus. So in 1920, the Orthodox moved out. And in 1922, the Hussites moved in. And it's still a Hussite church. Remember that church. It's free to go in there. Won't cost you anything to visit that church. There's always a person at the door, and they look like they're going to ask you for money if you get close to the door. They won't. Okay, they're selling concert tickets for later in the evening. But during the daytime, totally free to go in, walk past them, enjoy the church. If you look around the square at all the buildings, everything looks perfect here. And we've had World War I, World War II, medieval mayhem and madness roll through here several times, and it all looks completely undamaged. And it almost is. okay, but not quite entirely. Because right behind me, where those trees are, where all those trees are, that's where the original Old Town Hall used to be. But it was destroyed in May of 1945, right at the very, very end of the Second World War, by a Nazi artillery barrage. And here's another cool detail on the square. If you look farther to the left, if you look at the edge of that red building, if you look at the edge of that maroon building, it almost looks like a big bite was taken out of the side, like a biscuit or a cookie. And it was by that artillery barrage in May of 1945. That little section is all of the original Old Town Hall that they managed to salvage, that they managed to save. But that used to extend out all the way where those trees are now. Oh. So just a couple of details with Old Town Hall, or what's left of it, and the different sizes on the towers that most people just simply don't pick up on during their visit here to Prague. Okay, here's what we're going to do next. We're going to leave Old Town Square. It's going to get a little bit quieter. We're going to walk up the street over here called Železna. We're going to walk for about 2 minutes. We're going to go see a great and important theater called Stavorsky Divadlo, or the Estates Theater. And I'll tell you why it's so important when we get there. Come on.